There we go. Hello, Ashley.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Doing well.
It's good to see you over virtual means today.
Yes, great to see you. Happy Friday, by the way.
Thank you. Right before a holiday weekend. It's a strange holiday, but it's all good. We'll make it work, right?
Indeed, indeed. Well, some would argue life is a holiday, and some would argue that recently we've had the most unwanted staycation in our lives, but we still go forward.
Onward and upward. I love it. Well, for everyone watching who may not have seen the pre-announcement, the topic for today is emotional intelligence, which is very meaty topic. We got a lot to dig into on this, so I'm looking forward to it. And just wanted to thank everybody for the overwhelming response last week. I asked for feedback, and boy, did you deliver. So I really appreciate that, and please continue to share whether you feel like this has been helpful, whether we should keep going. Can do as many as you want. So keep the comments and the direct messages coming in, the text messages. It was all wonderful. I really appreciate that. So I'm relying on your feedback. As you know, the purpose of what we're doing here in the name of my company is Flourishing Work. So we're here to help you try to flourish in your work, especially during challenging times right now where things are a little different than we thought they would be in 2020. And today we're going to, like I said, talk about how to flourish in your work through emotional intelligence. So Jonathan is a very special guest who's joining us today, and apparently we're both drinking LaCroix, so that was an unintentional advertisement. But, so
Product
we,
placement.
yeah, we know each other because we have very similar businesses actually, and vocations, if you will. We happen to both be contracted instructors with Emory Continuing Education, and so we have seen each other in the halls while we're both teaching there, and had some really, what I felt like were really interesting, good conversations that I'm happy to be able to bring to you on a more accessible level, where as if you were, in the living room here with us, or in what music room or wherever Jonathan is. You get to hear the conversation. So without further ado, I'll ask Jonathan just to briefly introduce himself. You know how we met each other, but and his name is Jonathan, but tell us more about what it means for you to be a human capital investor and what your company does.
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. And it is a great pleasure to talk to you about this and every topic. I mean, that's one of the things I appreciate about you is every time we connect, it's always like, oh God, I wish we had more time to talk about this. And certainly this is one of those topics. But yeah, so my company is called The Best Workplace, and The Best Workplace is really about purpose, productivity, growth, very similar to the themes and topics of fulfillment, not only workplace fulfillment, but life fulfillment. And I work with a lot of small, mid-sized companies all throughout the Atlanta area on a whole host of things, most of them around organizational development. So organizational development could be under the guise of helping your operations being more efficient. It could be about your leadership being more engaging, communicating better. It could be just as something as simple as what technology do we use to make all this stuff happen? Lately, of course, because of the COVID-19 crisis, I've been very involved in a lot of PPP loans. So that's helping the small businesses get the funds that they need to make sure that they stay afloat. So that, I think, is a very worthwhile endeavor given this current crisis. Now, you had asked about what does a human capital investor do? It's one of those things where I was discussing with someone. So, what am I? I used to be an organizational psychologist. In other words, I was licensed when I was up in Pennsylvania, living up there. But when I moved down here, the licensure is only for people that have PhDs. So I don't have a PhD in that. So I thought about what I did in the arc of my career. I invest my time into developing people, into developing human capital.
Beautiful.
So I just threw that out there to a friend of mine and he said, oh my God, that's perfect. You're a human capital investor. That's exactly what you're doing. Also trying to get leaders at all levels to invest their time, invest their resources into developing truly what is their best asset, which is the people that they employ. And yeah, I agree with you. The great opportunities that we have working with the Emory University's continuing education department really allows us to deliver a lot of this stuff to a very big population. I mean, all the major employers in the Atlanta area. And we get in not just knee deep, we get in eyeball deep with them on very, very real issues. And I absolutely love what we do.
Couldn't agree more. Love investing in people. So we definitely connect around that topic for sure. In my opinion, I'm very biased, but there couldn't be any more important work. So um, we today's topic is, like we said, emotional intelligence. And so I thought of you for a few reasons on this topic, but namely that I feel like you're one of the people in my sort of walks of life that exhibits that the best. And so hopefully that means you also have a lot of meaty things to say about it, but we'll see. So just to kind of level set on, I feel like as many times as I've read an article on emotional intelligence, I've seen that many different definitions. So how would you define emotional intelligence?
Yeah, there are a lot of definitions out there, certainly, and there's very robust competency models around it. But for me, it's the awareness and management of the emotions of yourself and others.
Mhm.
So, to me, there's four components of it, and that is awareness and management, yourself and others. So if you just kind of draw out that matrix, it's self-awareness, that's what I'm feeling, it's self-management. How do I manage these feelings that I have? And then identifying the emotions of others. So that's, sometimes they call that social awareness or situational awareness.
Mhm.
And then social management or relationship management. So that I think is about as succinct of a definition as I've come up with.
That's great. I love a framework. I went to business school. We always do frameworks for everything. So I love the quadrant. That's really a great visual representation of that in a way that I haven't heard it explained before. So I appreciate that. See, I'm already learning something new, and we got the first question.
There
Um,
you go.
so let's dig a little bit more into that self-awareness piece that you were talking about. So I know there are a lot of different assessments. There are, I don't know, personality assessments that, you and I have both dug into, whether it's DISC or Myers-Briggs or others. Um, and then, another common one with some of the higher level folks in organizations is a 360 assessment where an executive or a CEO maybe gets feedback from peers, from all directions, from colleague peers, from higher ups, although I don't know who's higher up if you're the CEO, but go with it. And
The board. Yeah.
there you go, the board, and direct reports. So in the absence of some formal assessment like that, we're able to get just a lot of robust feedback. How can people, especially those who follow me, tend to be more early career in their 20s and 30s, how can they kind of see where they fit on that spectrum, how they can be aware of how they're coming across to others?
Yeah, well, I think you actually alluded to the number one tactic, and that's just directly asking people, how did I come off? So even if you're in a virtual meeting, maybe following up with someone that you trust to give you unbiased feedback, say, hey, how did I come off in that meeting?
Mm.
And one of the ways that I like to context it is saying, well, if there's one thing I could have done differently, what would that be?
Oh, that's a great nugget.
Because it narrows it down, it reduces the pressure. Because a lot of times when people say like, oh, how did I do? We're very inclined to say, great. And
Right.
and it's just like nothing to fix here. So I like to say, well, look, if there's one thing I could improve, well, the way that and so that really helps me, and it's something that I stole from my father. I mean, a lot of things I'm going to mention, I just blatantly stole from my father. So that would be the number one tactic. But connected to that, and this is just on an ongoing basis, find a feedback partner. I like to find that unfiltered person. You know, we all know that one person at work or in our lives who is that unfiltered, like, oh, well, I just think that you're full of. Okay, I want that person.
The person tells you like it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, early in my life, I had an uncle, my Uncle Tom, who was the most unfiltered person I'd ever met. And he was great. He would just be like, psychology is a load of crap. It's like, all right, so tell me how you really feel. And he would tell me all the reasons why, and I just learned a lot from him. But the other big tactic, and this is, nowadays, there's no excuse for not being able to do that, and that's videotaping yourself. Give your phone, if you're going to be at a meeting, or record like we're doing right now, record your Zoom meetings, record your, Facebook Live meetings when it works. Record yourself, because you've seen yourself on video. There's nothing more instructive than seeing how you actually come off.
Oh, that's so awesome, because it's just a place I didn't expect this to go, which is just self-feedback even. And I was going to ask you, so I love that you sort of read my mind in terms of how do we do that in today's environment where most of us are still primarily at home. We have all these virtual meetings. Use those tools to your advantage. That was just great. And I think, we had talked some the other day about how not to feel like, two things, just to frame my question. One is how not to feel like you're kind of losing that sense of who you are, and changing who you are to adapt to that other person's style, which is related to the second half of that question, which is how do you know, is all feedback good, or how do you know what feedback to listen to and what feedback not to listen to?
Right. Yeah, sure. If we were to react to every piece of feedback that we get, we would probably be very neurotic, very paranoid, and possibly even paralyzed. So, one of the things that I stress to everybody is always be open to feedback. You should always be open to feedback, even if you don't agree with it. Even if you don't agree with it. But what you want to look for are the themes. So if you've got one person telling you you are incompetent, you got one person, you know what, you're incompetent, or you don't know what you're saying. But then you've got 9 other people who are saying, no, you know your stuff, you're very effective. Who
Right.
should you focus on? You should focus on what the majority is saying. I mean, this is clearly a concept where democracy should win. So you should be looking at what the majority says, but always be open to feedback. Even if somebody's being negative to you, even if someone's unloading on you, saying like, actually, you didn't do well on this, you really screwed this up, blah, 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 blah. Thank you for the feedback. What is it that you think I could do differently? Because who knows, they may actually be able to give you a little tidbit of information. And that, to me, the other concept, we didn't really talk about this too much, but something that my father told me is you want to be the adult in the room.
Oh, that's so good.
That is, to me, the core of emotional intelligence, and also the core of executive presence, is you want to be that adult in the room. So there's a great poem by Rudyard Kipling, If, and he said, keep your head while others around you are losing theirs. And my father used to read me that If poem, and it affected me as a child. It's just like, well, what does this mean? as I learned more and more in life, I realized that really is at the core of mental health, leadership health, longevity is cooler heads prevail. So again, no matter what feedback somebody's giving you, if somebody's yelling at you, I just say, thank you for the feedback. You know, what is it that I could do differently? Well, you just need to do this. And then, so, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, you shouldn't appreciate it. Well, and I do.
No, I love it. Oh gosh. It, there's something in kind of in what you're saying that sounds to me a little bit like maybe people have a good point, but they're just not as good at delivering it. And so just because they're yelling and screaming or acting inappropriately or whatever, doesn't mean that the feedback might not still be valuable. And I wanted to dig a little bit more into just circling back to your grid, talking about managing the emotions of yourself and others, because I think that's sort of where we're going here in part of this discussion, is the role of doing that in a workplace, whether it's virtual or not, where you don't typically talk about emotions or how you're feeling or how other people are feeling. So do you have any tips for people that are trying to just navigate that landscape, whether somebody's going off on them and acting inappropriately or they're struggling to manage their emotions? Can we talk more about the emotions in the workplace piece? Because I feel like that's something that is, I like to dig into things that people don't feel like is appropriate to talk about, in the sense that we're all thinking it, but it's not okay to talk about, it's not okay to have emotions. And I just feel like that's part of being human. And I feel like this framework really gives us a way to operationalize and talk about that. So I hope that question was somewhat clear.
Well, I'll do my best. So what I'm hearing is, you know, how do we make this real? How do we make emotions the type of thing that are factored into or discussed or considered when we do work or when we interact?
Mm-hmm.
And emotions are everywhere. They're inescapable. They affect everything that we do. They affect everything we do. Everything that we do. And that's one of the things I like to put out there whenever somebody says to me, well, you know, I'm a very logical person. We like to think that. We like to think that this, you know, 12-pound, 15-pound organ on our shoulders is a computer,
Yep.
void of bias. The truth is we are very biased by nature. It's the way our brains are designed. And you know this, we have this limbic system. And the limbic system, the seat of the emotions, that's what receives all of our sensory information. So what we see, what we taste, what we smell, what we hear, it goes into the emotional center first. It doesn't go to our logical center. It doesn't go to the executive function. It goes to the emotions first. And the mechanism behind that is actually a beautiful mechanism. It's what kept us alive. You know, so back when we were a little bit more native, let's just say, and living off the earth, we had to be aware of whether or not, you know, is that thing in the bushes, is that something I can eat, or is that something that's going to eat me?
Mm-hmm.
So we had this limbic system that always kind of had us on the alert. And this factors into how we make decisions. So any leader, any manager, any executive that thinks that they don't need to factor emotions into how they communicate, how they assign work, they're really fooling themselves. Everything has an emotional component, whether we like it or not. All of us are always on the edge of fight or flight.
Yes. Oh, I love what you said about, and this is why I wanted to talk about this, because you can't get rid of it. It is human to have emotions, and that just because we don't make decisions by emotions or talk about emotions a lot in the workplace doesn't mean they aren't still there. They're affecting everything, just like I love how you put it, and really just drove the point home with leaders that don't think or think that they can operate without that emotional space, you can't. You're not. You would have to not be human. So good luck with that.
Yeah, indeed. And this is, I mean, it's so real right now because of the crisis that we're going through. And, lest we think like, well, people are logical and rational. Okay, then why did we hoard toilet paper?
Exactly.
I mean, really? I mean, are we still
Exactly.
suffering under this delusion that we're like Spock on Star Trek? I mean, it's just not how things work. And especially in the times of crisis, the cortisol is raised, the blood actually drains from the executive function. We stop being logical and we default to, there's this beautiful mechanism called the reticular activation system in our brain. So we're just going back to, it's like automatic. And automatic is, when we were children, basically. And those oftentimes are not constructive behaviors. That's doing things like name calling, red, blue, black, white, liberal, conservative. So under times of stress, we end up like pointing fingers, and we all know how that goes.
Yeah, this is just so important to understand. And I think uh, one of the things I was going to ask you was to kind of put your consultant hat on, and recommend, or maybe not even recommend, but just talk to people about why it's important to care about this topic and how it would make their work better, their work product better, their workplace better, leading people better. How would you say that being more aware of this, and I think this is kind of what we're talking about in the sense, especially right now, we're in a time of crisis, whether you've processed that or not, you will. We're in a time of crisis. How can people use this concept of emotional intelligence to better flourish in their work?
Yeah, well, let me, I'll tell you a little bit of my background and my story. And early in my life, I wanted to be like my father. And, my dad was a very kind of macho, command and control kind of guy, ex-Army officer. And he always came across as very self-confident, very self-assured. And in the parlance of DISC, those of us who've taken the DISC, he was a high D. He was very dominant. But there was also a very sensitive side to my dad. He loved animals. He was very compassionate. And he showed this sensitivity a lot. I mean, he would cry during emotional things, and he wasn't afraid to do that in front of me. And when I asked him about this, he said, well, I learned early on, you have to be aware of this internal dialogue that you have going on, that you need to tune into this internal dialogue and their feelings that you have, and you need to be aware of these feelings. So this is from the big macho guy, right? Very much like stoic, what's your plan, son? He's talking about the emotional world. What's going on here? And he said, you have to be able to manage your emotions, and you have to be able to manage the emotions of the people that you lead if you want to lead them effectively. And so one of the first things that he said to me is like, you build confidence by understanding your weakness. You build confidence by listening to that internal dialogue and being able to manage that internal dialogue. That's the first thing you need. Like, we all have doubts. We all have doubts. You've heard of the imposter syndrome?
Oh, yes.
Everybody has the imposter syndrome, except for sociopaths. So if you're a sociopath, that internal dialogue doesn't really exist in the same way that you and I think of that internal dialogue. But let's just cast those people aside for the moment and just say the average person has self-doubt. Even the most boisterous, narcissistic seeming person, they have self-doubts. And as a matter of fact, narcissists are the ones who have the most self-doubt.
Yeah.
And they're masking it. They're masking it through bullying others. And there's a person I could use as an example, but I'm not going to because I'm better than that. This dialogue that I had with my father really was very instructive, and it made me realize that, okay, first thing, let's just talk about the emotional space in the workplace. And you see this now through what a lot of companies are doing, which is they're having Zoom calls just to talk about how people are feeling.
Oh.
Because we're all going through extreme stress, right? I mean, especially I'm more on the extroverted side, so and so is my wife. So we're going through some crisis right now because we can't connect with people the way that we used to.
Yes.
So that's one of the first ones, is just get to the point where you can, it's okay to talk about emotions. It's okay to be, I'm pissed off. Let's talk about it. You know what? I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm happy, I'm overjoyed. Let's just talk about all these things. I'm embarrassed. I felt very embarrassed. Let's just talk about all these things. Being able to label emotions is the first step to controlling them. Because if you keep it this kind of ambiguous blob, there's this feeling, the feelies, there's this feely thing, this cloud, with children.
Right.
When the kids were in my life, I used to say, like, well, how are you feeling, Cassandra? And Cassandra would be like, well, I'm just frustrated, I'm angry. And I noticed once she started identifying what it was, she could then control it a little bit better and say, like, well, what do you do with that? Well, I just want to punch a pillow. Go ahead, punch a pillow. I just want to scream. So that's how you can then start channeling that energy. And I think as leaders, and especially in the positions that we're in, I think that we need to try and enable that and create an environment. Sometimes they call it psychological safety.
Mm-hmm. Can you say more about that for people who aren't familiar with that concept? I'm a big champion of it, but for the audience.
Yeah, sure. So Amy Edmondson has written a lot of The Fearless Organization, great book, about this whole idea that the psychological safety is something that we as leaders need to create in our organization. And in other words, allow people to talk about things openly, allow people to talk about what they're good at, what they're not good at, mistakes that they've made. And you can just imagine, like in most environments, when a leader creates an environment like that, that's where you see real progress as far as capability building and also trust. It creates oxytocin. People trust each other. They're willing to exhibit discretionary effort. So these are just all the wonderful things that emotionally intelligent workforces can actually bring to the fore.
Oh, I love it. And I'm sort of forming this picture in my mind as you're speaking of something going back to the conversation I had last week on my live session around, we were talking about anxiety and how the act of fighting it is taking up those mental resources that you need to be using to find peace. And I think that this is really similar in the sense that you're taking up mental resources by not identifying there's something in there in your brain that's frustrated and it doesn't know why and it hasn't processed that yet. So identifying what it is takes that pressure off. And then, what is the next step? Okay, I want to punch something. Great. Hopefully not a person, but punch something. And then, and then you've brought that confusion, that chaos, and that emotion out of your head into something productive. And from a workplace perspective, if you're spending all those mental resources on the things that, emotions and so forth that are unprocessed, you're taking that capacity out of your ability to do work. You only have so much mental capacity. It's sort of the this behind the book, Getting Things Done. I don't know if you've read that.
No, I haven't, but yeah.
Just a time management resource that basically is built around the premise of your mind is meant for having ideas, not for storing information. Or background processing. It's like having a million windows open on your computer. If you got all this stuff in the background holding you down, how are you supposed to do your work? How are you supposed to show up in your work at your fullest and do your best? And so companies that want to see really good work product and productivity and low turnover, this is your thing. One of the things anyway.
Right on. Yeah, I love it. There's only so much metabolic energy that we have, and to consume all that metabolic energy in things that you can't control, or trying to wrangle with emotions. I hit the nail on the head there, Ashley.
No. Well, thanks. We should work more together.
Yeah, we should. Absolutely. Let's talk more.
We spend all of our time teaching simultaneously. We should teach together. No, I love it. And so you kind of covered what I was going to ask about how you've personally applied some of these principles. So thank you. You read my mind. That was perfect. I guess, so those who are watching this are hungry to grow. They're not just sitting around doing nothing, which for anyone who is perfectly fine. Some of us just need space to rest. But for those who are really hungry to grow and apply this to their lives, what are some other resources you can direct them to learn more about this?
Yeah, there's, well, I have it on my bookshelf. Hold on.
Okay, we're going to get an actual visual. I love it. See, you wouldn't have gotten this maybe if we had done this live.
So there are a couple different resources that I recommend, and I realize this is going to be backwards, but Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman is the godfather of emotional intelligence. I think he's been credited with coining it, but I think this gentleman named Robert Boises actually came up with a term. But Daniel Goleman wrote the book, Emotional Intelligence. Great. It's a little thick, but it's a great read. He's a good writer. For those who maybe want a more Cliff Notes version, there's Travis Bradberry's book, The Emotional Intelligence Quick Book. And also, Emory has great classes on emotional intelligence. Yes, look at that. So I would recommend that definitely if you want to explore this further, either, and/or read those books, take the class, and/or reach out to us, reach out to either one of us, because we can help guide you through this. One of the things that we didn't really talk about, so I'm just going to mention here some real world tactics. So there's some prerequisites to emotional intelligence, and I call it SNAP, and that's sleep. If you're not getting the right amount of sleep, your 6 to 8 hours of sleep every night, then there's going to be chemical imbalances in your brain, in your body. The stress hormones are going to go up. The trust hormones are going to go down. Serotonin is going to drop. You're going to feel lethargic, and you're going to snap at people. So you need to get sleep. The other one is nutrition. So if you're not eating well, you're not going to have the right chemicals in your body to deal with stress. And activity is the A in SNAP. So you need to, we were just talking about this before the call. You need to remain active. You need to oxygenate your body. Yeah. And that doesn't need to be CrossFit where you're flinging truck tires. You don't need to do that. You can actually just go for a walk on a beautiful day like today. And the P to me is professionalism. And that is just keep learning. Just keep learning, keep reading great books like, Travis Bradberry or Daniel Goleman. Go to the great classes that we teach. Reach out to great practitioners such as ourselves. So that to me is kind of the prerequisite. Now, on top of that, when it comes to self-awareness, I think mindfulness, I think meditation, prayer. To me, I think all of those are within that same bucket. All of those things, focused breathing. I know some people, when they think about meditation, they think, it's a Buddha statue with incense and all that nonsense. That's not what we're talking about. Focused breathing really just helps you relax. it oxygenates your body and takes some of the cortisol out of your body.
Mm.
When it comes to self-management to me is, again, make sure you get enough sleep, exercise, all that, but also knowing what your triggers are. Like if you know that there's certain people that just really get under your skin, well, just be prepared for that when you have to meet with them. Just know that, okay, I will do some deep breathing exercises before I go into this meeting with this individual.
Yeah, right.
I won't react to the first thing that they say. In the world of psychology, we say separate stimulus from response. If you know whenever your spouse says X that you want to say Y, then when they say X, give it a couple clicks, maybe count to 10. Because all of us, any of us have been married, have given the greatest speech we've ever regretted. Like, I'll tell you. And then it's like, oh, shucks, man, I didn't mean to say that. So just being able to decompress. And then when it comes to the social awareness can be as simple as what we started the conversation with. And that is like, how are you feeling? How are you feeling today? At the beginning of a Zoom meeting, how's everybody feeling today? Let's just go around the call here. We've got 6, 7 people. How are we feeling? How was our weekend? What do you love to do? What hobbies did you start? That sort of thing. And then when it comes to social management, I mean, that's influencing skills, that's persuasion, but a lot of that, again, goes back to cooler heads prevail, be that adult in the room, and people will want to follow you.
I think that was a mic drop moment. I think we might be done. That was how to get people to want to follow you. Oh, so good. I love it. And the other thing I was noticing as you were saying all that is I didn't hear a single thing in all of those fantastic practical tips that you just gave that people can't do now. It's easy to feel like we're constrained and we can't build those relationships and we can't be active and we can't. It's so easy to think that, but I didn't hear, maybe I'm wrong, somebody correct me in the comments, but I didn't hear a single thing you said that we can't do now, even given the situation that we're in with the pandemic. So all of that can be done either virtually, prayer, meditation, mindfulness, all of those things you mentioned. Those are all things, reading books, and that's the other thing I love about just our field is how collaborative it is. People can come to you, they can come to me, they can go to Emory and find us teaching there, find other people teaching there. Doesn't matter. We care about investing in the human capital. I don't care how you learn it. Read a book. Doesn't matter. Please just learn, and we're happy to help you. I love how collaborative it is. There's plenty of knowledge to go around. So thank you for all of those actionable tips that people can do today if they're really looking to grow, which is I hope where people are watching this. Any other tidbits before we close today? Or did we catch all of the points you wanted to share?
Well, I think you and I could probably talk about this topic for several hours, especially over coffee, tea, wine, whatever.
One day.
I mean, I would say that, just kind of wrap it up, emotional intelligence is a life skill. It's a life skill. This is not the type thing that you could compartmentalize into work. This is something that you can talk about fulfillment. This is something that it's a cornerstone to fulfillment. It's not a stepping stone, it's a cornerstone. And it'll help you reduce stress. It helps you build confidence if you can manage that internal dialogue. It helps you be objective. That's one of the things I forgot to mention as I was going through the organizational impacts. If we as a society, as an organization, want to progress, we need to know when we're being affected emotionally by something. And we need to be able to step back from that and say, okay, are we reacting emotionally or are we reacting objectively? And I think there's no better example of that than what we're going through right now, Ashley, is we've got a great schism in society between those people that are just like, well, I just want to go out and get my hair done. And then other folks saying like, okay, what, does this make sense right now?
Sure.
Let's just make sure we have the right data. And to think that those two things are coupled like that. They're coupled in our brains. But for us to be effective as leaders, we need to parse those two things out. It's fine to be emotional. It's, we all get pissed off. We all get stressed. And we need to recognize that. So let's just stick a stake in sand and say, okay, are you saying that because you're emotionally invested? Or are you saying that because you have data to back that up?
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to recognize. We all get caught up in that, right? Well, I know I'm right because I'm passionate about it. Okay, all right. I'm passionate about a lot of things. It doesn't mean I'm right.
Is this going back to, sorry, I'm extending this a little bit, but I'm really curious just to ask if this is related to, you made a comment to me one time where you said you were a recovering D on the disc, which without going into too much detail about what exactly that means, I'm just curious if what prompted that kind of change in how you wanted to present yourself, or if that's related to what you were just saying.
Sure. Yeah, it does. So I gave you the example of my father. So I was following in the template of George, and I wanted to be like him. And a lot of people wanted to be like him. And so I felt that I needed to be in this kind of command and control mode. And then fast forward to after I got out of grad school and I started managing people, I started to try and command and control my way through management. And I found that, oh, wait, people are disagreeing with me or they have ideas like, but I'm the one who has the title. I'm the one who has control. How dare they? So I started being very ego driven. And it really wasn't until I had kids in my life, specifically teenagers, that they wore me down. It was like a grindstone. I mean, they just kind of wore me down. And I realized that even though I was a D early on, I didn't need to always be that way. And I was grinding my teeth. I wasn't sleeping well because I was very concerned about, I'm picking on Cassandra, but, like, how come Cassandra's late? She has homework to do and she's a teenager and she's slamming the door in my face. All of these things made me realize I need to shift into a different mode. And that mode is being, all right, I need to be aware of why I'm grinding my teeth. Well, it's because I'm trying to control a teenage girl.
Good luck.
Good luck. So maybe I should shift my tactics here a little bit.
Yes.
Maybe I should try and be the adult in the room and calmly influence. Because as anybody knows out there, and all the manuals will tell you, when you've got a teenager, you want to shift into an influence mode. They're not always going to do what you want them to do. So it needs to be that kind of calm influence. If they do slam the door in your face, say, okay, I'll talk to you about this tomorrow.
Yep.
But the worst thing you can do is react and just kind of feed the hormones that are coursing through their teenage infected heads.
Well, since we were all teenagers, I think we can all laugh at ourselves at that stage, myself included. But what a great way to illustrate all of the things that you talked about in one story. I think the best part of that is that you gave us the freedom to change a little bit about not who we are, but our approach to things, because it's not about being someone different or being what other people want you to be. It's about your approach wasn't working for you. You weren't sleeping. You were unhealthy. You were unhappy, to paraphrase. And and another, being self-aware of what was going on and having another approach and doing all the things that you've talked about, you know, being the adult in the room and managing your emotions and other, like all of the things that you've said just kind of came together in that one story to prove that it's not about changing who you are and having to meet other people's expectations and not being yourself. It's about identifying what's working and not working for you, listening judiciously to some of that feedback that some people, you know, maybe giving good feedback and maybe they're not delivering it in the best way, but they're still giving good feedback. And others, you know, maybe statistical anomalies, if you will, that we can just cast out because only 1 person out of 10 is saying it. And just seeing where the common denominator in all of that is, that will make your situation at work or at home better for you. So I love that you just rounded that all out in one single story. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's because of the host's capabilities.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You were able to draw that out of me.
Well, I love it, and I know we're wired to be story oriented. So I appreciate you telling us a little story about that too. If people want to learn more about the work that you do, is the best place for them to go your website, which is thebestworkplace.com?
Correct. Yeah, thebestworkplace.com. My email, I have 2 very simple versions of my email. It's either jonathan@thebestworkplace.com or Jonathan Burman at thebestworkplace.com.
That's
And
M-A-N.
yes, B-U-R. Thank you very much. Yeah.
You know, you're Jonathan Burman who spells it differently, and I get very confused sometimes.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, and this is, you know, I hope anybody watching this could see this is a topic that both Ashley and I are very, very passionate about. And we're happy to help you become the adult in the room, be the executive, be the leader that you want to be, and really shepherd your people through these difficult times. The best way you can do that is through exhibiting emotional intelligence.
Well said. And on that note, I think I've lined up my guest for next week. Also someone who is in the same field, focuses more on coaching, to talk more about how to gain clarity and flourish in your work through more clarity. So it's a very good next, you know, segue to what we talked about today. But again, I'm relying on your feedback. If you found today helpful, give me feedback. Tell me why, tell me what you want to see more of. Tell me that you want to see more, and we'll continue. It's up to you guys, and really appreciate, Jonathan, have your time and powering through all of the technical difficulties to still get this message out to people. We will find a way, and we did, and I so appreciate your time.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you very much, Ashley, for pulling this together. Cheers, y'all.